The Muslims continued to spread, and in the year 1600, there was an English adventurer or soldier named John Smith, and he went to join the Austrian army, fought the Muslims for 5 years, was actually captured. They put an iron ring around his neck, and he was sold as a slave, and finally escaped, found his way, fought the Muslims some more. Then he went down and fought the Barbary pirates. And the Muslims controlled the entire Mediterranean, the southern Mediterranean. They conquered all Turkey. They captured Sicily. They were invading into Italy. And John Smith fought for years, and then he went back to England in the year 1605, and in 1606, Captain John Smith set sail to found the first permanent English settlement in the New World, Jamestown. And we all know Captain John Smith from there because Chief Powhatan captured him, and he was about to kill him when 11-year-old Pocahontas began crying and saved his life, so we all know from there. Anyway, another interesting story is in 1683, 138,000 Muslims surrounded Vienna, Austria. There were only 10,000 defenders, and the Muslims were starving them out for 2 months, but that gave the Polish king, Jan Sobieski, 2 months to gather 80,000 Poles, Germans, Hungarians to come to the rescue on September 11th, 1683. They came over the hill, surprised the Muslims, sent them fleeing in fear, and within a half an hour they won the battle. An interesting story, they went into the tents of the Muslims and found these bags of beans, coffee beans, and they realized this was how the Muslims could fight day and night, this new drink, and shortly thereafter opened the first Vienna coffee house, and coffee spread across Europe. In 1789, America had now been born. America spent 20% of our national budget to ransom our soldiers and sailors that had been captured and put in the dungeons of Algiers and Tunis and Tripoli. And Thomas Jefferson was ambassador to France, and he asked the ambassador from Tripoli why they were jumping on ships with daggers clenched in their teeth. And he said, "It is written in the laws of the prophet that all who should not acknowledge Islam's authority were sinners, and it was their right and duty to take them captive." Anyway, when Jefferson became the third president, he got fed up, sent in our Marines, and they captured the Pasha at Tripoli and forced him to make peace. And so that's why the Marine song is from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And the curve in the Marine sword comes from the scimitar swords that they confiscated. Anyway, John Quincy Adams in 1830 writes a story that as soon as they signed the treaty and left, a year later they started the war again. And when they were confronted, the Muslims produced that treaty that our negotiators signed in Arabic. And John Adams says, our negotiators, unacquainted with the language of the Qur'an, signed the treaty in both languages, not imagining there was any difference between them. But when the Muslims produced the treaty, it said that we had surrendered to them. So John Quincy Adams says, you can't trust the Muslims when it comes to treaties. Anyway, in the late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire got behind the military curve, and Greece broke away, and Romania broke away, and parts of Bulgaria, and parts of Hungary and Poland broke away, and there was this little country called Armenia. Armenia was between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. They were all Christian. It was actually the first country to officially declare itself Christian. And these Armenians wanted to break away. And between 1915 and 1922, the Muslims killed 1.5 million Armenian Christians. Marched them into the desert until they died. State Representative Sally Kern was with me last week at Phyllis Schlafly's thing. And there's a Missouri State Representative named Cynthia Davis. And her grandfather was an Armenian. He escaped by being a 6-year-old boy. And he lied under the dead bodies in the desert for 3 days. And then finally escaped, and some Muslim family gave him a meal. The next thing you know, there's a rope tied around his foot, and they made a slave out of him. For 10 years, he was a slave. Finally, he was putting grain onto a ship, and there's an empty spot in a bag, and he climbs in it, and the ship takes off, and he gets off in France and carries the bag off, But they butchered. There was a Christian church in Smyrna from the Apostle John's time up until 1922. And remember the Tiananmen Square massacre, all these little freedom demonstrators in China, and as soon as America said, we're not going to intervene, they went in there and killed them all. Well, Woodrow Wilson's last effort of his life was to try to get America to adopt Armenia as a protectorate like Puerto Rico. And he went to the Republican-controlled Senate, and they said they did not want to get involved in some civil war in a Muslim country on the other side of the world. And when word reached over there that America would not come to the aid, the Muslims went in there to the city of Smyrna and drugged the Byzantine bishop out of his church, dismembered him in the street. They killed men, women, and children. Blood ran down the street, made the port waters red. There were American ships in the harbor. They could hear the screams. They could see the people running out and drowning because they didn't want to get cut up, but they had no orders to intervene. And then they took what Christians were left and sent them over to Greece. They left 100,000 Christians in Constantinople, but in 1955 they had a pogrom. They went in there and smashed all the windows of the Greek Christians, drugged the Byzantine priests out of their bed, ripped out their beards, and circumcised them in the street. Anyway, the Christians fled. Now today there's just a handful. There's a couple thousand Christians left over there. But you know how America was going to adopt Armenia as a protectorate? France adopted Lebanon and Syria as a protectorate. Britain adopted Palestine and Iraq as a protectorate, and out of that was birthed Israel, thank God. And but we see that France gave Lebanon its independence in 1943. Lebanon was an 80% Christian country, Maronite Christian, Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholic. They set up a democracy. Then they went through a process called Islamification. So many Muslims moved in and had so many children because they could have 4 wives that they had more numbers, and they took over the democratic form of government, and then they passed laws against the Christians. And between 1970 and 1990, they killed over 100,000 Lebanese Christians over there. Anyway, I just thought I'd come and encourage you tonight.